I'm of a different school of thought where I think, there were something like 58 or 52 flights daily between Amsterdam and London. I hope it never goes back to that amount because that's not necessary.
Welcome to a new Smack episode. I'm your host, Florian Montag, and today I had the pleasure to welcome an old friend, Chalana Perera. I spoke with Chalana about his love for hotel development, his experiences with both Citizen M and Yays, how he thinks hotel concepts will evolve through COVID-19, and why now is the best time to move back home to Sri Lanka. Enjoy the show. Hello, Chalana. Welcome to Smack, all the way from the tropical island live in Sri Lanka in quarantine. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Florian. Great to join with you guys remotely here from the island. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to the discussion that we're going to have.
Yeah, I think we met each other, what was that, 5, 6 years ago in EHL during our studies. Since then, you've been working for companies like Citizen M and Yays in their development life and investment teams. Can you maybe share our audience a bit your story since we met at EHL and what you've done the last few years?
Sure, with pleasure. I think indeed you and I got to know each other. I think we overlapped by 1 or 2 years back at EHL in Switzerland. So I finished school in 2015, the summer of 2015, little over half a decade ago now that I think about it. And I think we got to know each other better after school, indeed, through various conferences and events and alumni networking. After graduation, I joined Citizen M in their development and investment team at their head office in the Netherlands, outside of Amsterdam, in a small town called Voorschoten, more like a village, really, near a farm. The reason I joined them following hotel school was that I actually interned with them in my second internship. As you know, the program requires two different internships, one on the practical hospitality operational side, and the second at the latter stage of studies in a more administrative managerial function. And I was placed, luckily, with Citizen M's development team as their first development intern in Europe. At that time, their team was also very much in its infancy and expanding rapidly. So the reason I ended up at Citizen M was thanks to a professor at EHL and an introduction made to me with one of the founders of Citizen M at the time, Michael Levy, the COO of Citizen M. So that's how I ended up with them. Did an internship for about 5 months, and essentially they offered me a job, saying, "Hey, when you graduate, come back and join the team." And initially, I said, let me scout for other opportunities." But when I graduated, I thought actually these guys seem to be doing all the right things, scoring in the right way, and it will be a big steep learning curve to enter that company as a fresh graduate. So it was a combination of luck, timing, and a little bit of instinct, but it was a great 3.5 years that I had with the development team at Citizen M.
So you can really say that your experience at Citizen M during your first or second internship was the trigger. Was it the trigger for your interest into the world of hotel development, or did you know already before, hey, that's what I want to go into, and that's why you chose Citizen M in the first place? Or was that first experience in that part of the industry kind of a trigger for you?
That's a good question. I think it was just by chance that I landed in hotel development. To be quite frank with you, the curriculum at EHL, especially up until the latter years, did not include much about real estate investment or development, if at all anything. So my exposure was very limited, but I had always been fascinated by what it meant to develop, create, build, invest in hotels, in hospitality venues. And later I would come to know this fascination as actually the real estate industry. I never knew of it as a term like that because, again, at hotel school, we didn't discuss too much about real estate unless you chose to take a certain elective. So it was really curiosity in understanding what does it mean to build a hotel? What does it mean to source and secure a site and actually construct a hotel? And I somehow always had this curiosity on the complexity and also how how the numbers would add up. You know roughly what you pay for certain types of hotel, but it never made sense to me to understand. Okay, generally, if we talk about 5-star luxury, you've got oftentimes multiple swimming pools, multiple restaurants, multiple bars, hundreds, if not thousands, of staff member, depending on the number of keys and the city and the location. How can that be paid off atop of the capital investment on the actual building, the marbles, the chandeliers? Okay, I didn't think about it in that much depth, but essentially, I was lured by my curiosity with the complexity of development. And I think Citizen M provided me quite an open book, an open playing field, let's say an empty canvas to sort of play and say, hey, we don't have a structured management traineeship program. We don't have really a structured intern program, but we would love to offer you the opportunity to join our team as an intern in development. And I did a whole variety of things, supporting underwriting for new developments, a lot of market research on new markets, new cities, understanding and mapping out data, a lot of work on business intelligence, reviewing lease agreements in their infancies, reviewing acquisitions agreements in their infancies, and shadowing a lot of complex deal related discussions, which in my latter years when I joined the company full time, I continued to improve and hone on those skills. So it was again a combination of luck, curiosity, and just interest that led me to that job.
So, can you tell us a bit more about what's the job description in hotel development? Is it just doing feasibility studies, spending your time on Excel, and making sure that the finances work? Or, I mean, when I checked your Instagram over the years, I always had the feeling, man, he has the dream job because you're always also visiting a lot of sites. Can you give us a bit of insights on what was your job description? How did a normal day in your life look like?
I think the first disclaimer should be that Instagram always only shows one side of the picture, right? It's through a very specific lens. So indeed, I had the privilege of at a very young age being able to travel for work. I also traveled extensively leisurely, but for work, visiting new concepts, some out of my own interest and some at my times with Citizen M, but more, I traveled much more regularly when I joined YACE, the second part of my career in Europe. But the role of a development investment specialist, as they call it, or analyst, so right after graduation, which was to step up after my internship, at Citizen M, it was quite broad. And the structure, I won't go into too much detail, but they have quite a well structured and an efficient system in how they source deals and develop opportunities. So I was under the umbrella that's called asset management. So the organization is structured into operations and asset management as an owner operator. Several hotel chains have various structures. Essentially, that's the basic principle. You have an operating company and you have an ownership company, which some phrase as asset management. So under asset management, we in the development team were tasked with sourcing new opportunities. In my specific role, it was initially across the world. So I was actually looking at opportunities in Australia, a little bit in APAC, North America, and Europe. I was acting as a support function across the platform. But when I joined full time with the European team at the head office, I was focused primarily on key European markets, and they had a very focused development strategy. They had a list of 8 target markets based on certain metrics, which are, of course, sort of their KFC secret ingredients. So I cannot really tell what those metrics were, but they're quite straightforward. And the company was very much focused on its core values, which is providing high quality hospitality at an affordable price. So we, as the development team, were in charge of sourcing those opportunities. And to answer your question on Excel or what my day looked like, every day was different. There was a significant amount of underwriting. So underwriting meant sourcing assumptions, justifying assumptions, verifying assumptions. What is your top line? What is my ADR going to be at this location? What is my cost of employees going to be at this location? What is my GOP that I'm looking at? So creating essentially a P&L for a future hotel project on the operational side, plus an investment breakdown as well on the property side. So we had to underwrite both aspects, the operations and the property investment, financing and development. So that in a nutshell was the job, and that of course includes travel to visit sites. That includes regular communication with local market networks, which include brokers, investors, developers, property owners when we were lucky, competitors when necessary, data providers. So it was quite a dynamic, full on job that included late nights, early mornings, and sometimes even weekends. But it was a fantastic team that I worked with. I was really, really privileged to learn from some of the best in class, as they were referred to, primarily real estate professionals within the team, a very few with hospitality background, but many with investment and consulting backgrounds.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Actually, doing the real first-hand research yourself and then bringing it all together into a P&L and a plan for a hotel, which should then actually operate. Is there anything? I mean, after your studies at EHL, and then going hands-on in these projects and really learning all the numbers and everything behind the hotel, which surprised you, or learning which you said, "Oh, I never expected that this would be the case in a normal P&L of a hotel," or something which you say, hey, that really marked me in my first years of research?
Ooh. I think definitely when I first joined the team, both as an intern, but again full time after graduation, I was very naive. I had no formal real estate education whatsoever, and I had to learn a lot. I was sort of thrown in the deep end, and one thing I didn't mention earlier was that there was a lot of collaboration with different departments and functions within the company. So the beauty of Citizen M is that you've sort of got this campus in the Dutch countryside outside of Amsterdam where they have the head office. It's a beautiful building, a former silver factory converted, and all the different departments have representatives that are located in that building. Of course, with COVID now, people have been working remotely, etc. But there's a very strong cohesion between the guys in asset management, operations, sales, marketing, branding, product development, IT. So I would be able to liaise and contact and talk directly with the specialists of each different function to learn a lot on the job. And there was a lot of learning. I mean, one of the key underwriting principles was optimizing efficiency, right? So that was mostly on the space side. When you look at the real estate, how many rooms can you fit per square meter to get the best bang for your buck, let's say, from an investment perspective, but also what could you charge the clients on the operational side, outward facing towards the guests? How much can you charge somebody for the least amount of space? Of course, there's a lot of other ingredients involved. What is the quality of service? What is the target market? What channels do we use to distribute? And I think so many factors in the citizen and business model were just very different to what we were taught at hotel school, or what I had experienced in my, let's say, childhood or upbringing, in terms of what kind of hotels I stayed at when we traveled with my family, for example, on holidays, or in general, right? Even though Citizen M has been around since 2008 for the opening of their first property in Amsterdam, the concept is quite new. You can take a lot of people from different parts of the world, even within Europe, put them in a Citizen M, and they will be like, wow, this is cool. I've never experienced this. To think that we're now 2020, more than a decade later, the brand has proven to be still cool, relevant, innovative, and new. So to answer your question, sort of, I went on a tangent, but a lot of the underwriting was new, was sort of, oh, this is really interesting. You can run a 300 key hotel with less than 10 employees. How does that work? What does that really mean? Okay, then there's an outsourced component. Okay, that's interesting. So where do you allocate costs? Where do you cut costs? How do you centralize functions within the business model? Because sales, revenue management, etc., where in the traditional hotel world you have on property employees for several functions. A lot of these were centralized at Citizen M, and that's now widely known in the industry, and that's also widely practiced in the industry. But for me, that was all quite new.
Yeah. No, it's incredible how Citizen M, yeah, in 2008 brought out also the new model of kind of check-in terminals in a hotel and people having an assisted check-in with a real host. And I'm currently writing the German technology report, and where we even see like, okay, now through COVID, actually a lot of hotels in Germany are adopting kind of the mindset which Citizen M was already implementing, more than 12 years ago already. But in your years with Citizen M, looking at it, they've also evolved quite a lot. I'm sure. I mean, you've joined there in your first in your second internship, and then for 3.5 years, I think, after EHL. How did you see the evolution of at the beginning? Yeah, one property in Amsterdam to now having quite a large portfolio worldwide.
Indeed, that's correct. That they have evolved, let's say, in terms of global presence. If I speak purely from a development perspective, and I must remind you, I am an ex-employee, so they continue to evolve, and they have changed significantly in the past 2 years that I left them, which was the summer of 2018 when I resigned. Um, Essentially, from a development perspective, the company uh, presents itself as a real estate company, a fully integrated, so vertically integrated real estate company, meaning that they own the assets, or they want to own and invest in the assets, take care of the assets, which means asset management, and run the operations with their operating brand, which is Citizen M. That's on the soft side. So there's a hard and soft combined. So the evolution of that since I joined them in 2015 full time was significant, both in Europe and even more so thereafter in North America. I was one of the first junior employees in the development team across both continents, and in my time, deals were signed in Copenhagen, in Geneva, in Zurich, Paris, and London. Many of those have now opened in the past years, and the U.S. Team was actually essentially fully set up while in my first initial years while I was there. So it was really fascinating. Sometimes, to be honest, overwhelming to observe everything that was going on. And the reason I emphasize the real estate company perspective, the asset management perspective, being asset heavy adds a whole another layer of complexity, and takes also more time, right? We were not signing management or franchise agreements left, right, and center, because the brand and the founders and their vision was so much on building a strong brand that they could then grow and continue and keep consistent across the world. And they had a very focused target market strategy, which was they didn't want to open in secondary or tertiary cities. They didn't want to be perceived as just an airport hotel, because they started in several airports. But they wanted to be a city center core prime urban hotel brand. And that means real estate's not going to come cheap. Yet at the same time, you want to make yourself an affordable proposition to urban travelers, and be high tech, and be innovative, and offer the best customer service. So you're trying to achieve a lot, and they successfully have. But it was certainly not without a lot of sweat, a lot of tears from the guys up top, particularly, and in the teams that I worked in, there were several highly talented acquisitions and investment managers and directors that were recruited to source these very well located opportunities.
That sounds quite interesting. Actually, you're in a development team working there in fast pace growing hotel chain, but with real values and a real strategy. But then 2018, you decided, hey, I want to make the change. You stayed in Amsterdam. You went over to Yays. Is it because Citizen M became too mainstream and you became a bit too hipster in Amsterdam that you wanted to go with a new and young concept like Yays? Or can you tell us what were your thoughts behind that move, and also maybe introduce Yays to the listeners who are not familiar with the concept?
Yeah, that again was a difficult decision, I must say. When I was making the decision, when I had been approached by a headhunter early in 2018 for a new opportunity, I thought, oh, this is interesting. First of all, it's my first time, 3 years after graduation, being approached by a headhunter. I thought, how does this work? It's like get on the phone with my father, who I consult for almost every big decision in my life. And I said, I've been approached, what is this? And he's like, oh, this is how you handle the situations. This is a great opportunity. And then the thought process really began. And I had always been open to new ideas. And as you know, I have, an entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurial blood in me. So change and new was something I not thrive on, but it's something I look forward to, let's say. And I unfortunately have this this in my blood, where I cannot stay in one place for very long. So being in quarantine at the moment has been a good test of that. So I think leaving Citizen M, at the moment I did, was really a tough choice. Before I talk about Yays and why I made the move, I think that, let me say the reasons why I struggled to make the decision, or let's say why I would have stayed back at Citizen M. Real estate markets were certainly peaking, at least where we were looking. So core prime, prime locations in core cities in Western Europe. Some of the highest priced markets. A lot of new hotel brands were entering or trying to enter the space. And Citizen M had by then been a proven and tested concept, which finally we were getting phone calls with opportunities. Whereas really just 3 years before, in 2015, I remember we had to be much more proactive. My directors and managers above me were having to spend a lot more time marketing and communicating the brand story and vision, flying people into Amsterdam or London to do some test sleeping, to really make people aware of what this brand is and what it's all about. Because even people within the continent of Europe, and when I use the word people, I mean industry professionals from real estate or hospitality, they were still not convinced or not certain of Citizen M. But in the year that I chose to leave, there was a lot of opportunity coming our way, albeit competition was also very high. And in the world of real estate development, hotel brands and hotel operators are competing with other asset classes. And what do I mean by that? Other asset classes include commercial, so there can and offices, retail, mixed use developments, restaurants, F&B, but also residential, right? And city centers in Europe have had a lot of political movement and political agendas leaning towards a favor for affordable residential stock, which has been lacking in the areas that Citizen M was also looking for new opportunities. So it was a tough playing field, and I was lucky to be exposed to some of that. Of course, learning rapidly and observing my more senior colleagues navigate that complex real estate landscape. And I thought, okay, this has showed me that my 3.5 years at Citizen M has showed me that there's a lot more to do with urban development, urban planning. Hotels are not just a place for guests to sleep, but they're a part of a larger ecosystem of space, of functional use, of experiences. As we learned a lot about at hotel school, experience design and delivering, quality spaces depending on what the end user wants. And I think that's when I said to myself, it would be interesting to hone these skills and apply it in another context, still related to hospitality, which is my underlying and, let's say, base ground zero passion, and always will be, I believe. But paired it with the real estate experience, and that's when I link it now to Yays, the company which I recently left as well. When they approached me via headhunter, I first took a few steps back and I said, okay, what does this really mean? What is Yays in the short stay group? And I said service departments. I thought, service departments. I don't know, Flo, what you think when you first hear service departments, but generally hotel school graduates, maybe a downfall in their arrogance is that service departments are not considered the sexiest asset class or sexiest subject in the hotel business, right? If I can use the term sexy. Whereas
At least
boutique
a couple
hotels,
years ago.
at least exactly. So that's what I'm getting to. So at least at that time in 2018, and so they really were not. You would kind of overlook it. We had very few classmates going into the service department space. We had very few lectures that included service departments, or maybe it's my poor memory, but service departments were not often brought up in our education, and I cannot think of almost anybody who was interning in service department chains, albeit that business model has been around for a while and they've been doing well.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, you know what, this is perhaps not as sexy as Citizen M, but in terms of Citizen M being a design boutique, innovative, game changer, we were always featured in business reviews and articles, and that was really cool to be a part of a company that was sort of seen as the Tesla of the hotel industry at that time, right? So all those catchy names and marketing terms were thrown around all over Citizen M, and that added a lot of strength and value to my CV. So I'm always grateful for that, and I think that's why the headhunters approached me. So I had to really consider, okay, do I want to change space, concept, move out of a highly successful, fast-growing company, and enter a more entrepreneurial, also Amsterdam-based innovative Dutch concept that's focused on service departments. And after a few months of reflection and through the negotiation, or let's say the interview process with Yays at that time, I thought, you know what, let's go for it. Let me take the risk. Let me jump on this opportunity to get a step up in position, but also to enter a business that was at that time a couple years behind Citizen M in terms of its growth trajectory, but with very much similar intentions and values as Citizen M, and those being, Dutch companies which are known for innovation, known for their efficiency, practicality, known for being tech forward but highly customer centric, and known for being competitive when it comes to investments and returns and use of space. So I made the move, and it was certainly an interesting move. I was assigned my own markets, focused primarily on Paris and Barcelona. And at Citizen M, I was supporting on various markets. I was supporting different managers and directors with their transactions. So it was a big step up in terms of responsibility, in terms of commitment. And it was also a step up in a time when the real estate markets, again, particularly in Paris and Barcelona, were extremely disfavorable, or not open to new hotel developments, in the sense that prices were high. As I mentioned before, everybody had a new concept that was cooler than yours. If you sat at a real estate conference, which I attended quite a few of in my 2 years at Yays, the guy on my right always had a cooler or more clever idea, and the guy on my left, or the lady on my left, had more investment capacity than I. Right, so you're always in this context where there's always somebody out there who has that new cool product that's trying to get the same attention you are, and is fighting for limited development plots in some of these top cities in Europe. And why does everybody want to be in these same cities? Yeah, because if you can prove your concept in Paris or London or Amsterdam, you're likely to do well in other markets and likely to grow out of it. And you could say the same for North America, where I haven't worked much, but the East Coast and West Coast markets are where all these European innovative brands still want to plant their flags, right? So I took the bold decision, in consultation with not too many people, to be honest. At the end, it was a gut choice that I made, and I joined Yays, and I was happy that I didn't have to commute into the Dutch farmland, but could have a 7-minute bike ride down the canal from my apartment to the office. So that was a new luxury for me, which I really appreciated. But also the step up in responsibility, working with a smaller, ambitious team, on building a new brand out of a company that had a different legacy and that was traditional, if I could use the term, old school service departments, very successful, but also something that I particularly wasn't too involved in or aware of prior to joining. So that was sort of my thought process to enter Yays. It was a combination of taking risk, eagerness to expand my exposure to entrepreneurial companies. Start with a business that is more in its infancy than Citizen M, which was already becoming more established, and a step up in my career.
Yeah. So what makes Yays special, or how do they? You said they have a new way of doing service departments. What was their kind of USP when you were pitching the concepts?
That's a good question. I think I will try not to think too much from a numbers or a finance investment perspective, but essentially it does come down to that because, as I said a couple of times already, Yays is competing with Citizen M in a certain sense, not directly from clients, not directly from locations, but there's capital out there, there's developers out there, there's brokers out there that bring opportunities, and it's all a competition for attention, for time. Who gets the most attention? Who's the hottest subject at the moment, right? And at that time, in Q4 2018, when I joined Yays, service departments were still in the shadow, but they were gaining more and more traction, simply because in Europe, and this is something that through my interview process I really felt confident and I appreciated in Yays' model, is that in Europe, service departments are not as well established as they are in, let's say, a market like Australia or North America, or even in UK, where they have established brands, or I think Germany may be the one exception where there are established brands in a few markets, and you really have a solidified business model. In most of Europe, service departments remain a fragmented industry, right? Several independent brands. The distribution system is completely different to traditional hotels. The way they are marketed, the way they're communicated, and the way they're presented is just quite different, frankly. I think a lot of that has changed this year, given the circumstances of COVID-19 and what that has done to travel and to the hotel business. And I think service departments have benefited. Back at that time, the USP when I joined was, hey, we actually have high quality spaces, looking at and looking at urban locations which are not commercial core city centers, not the crowded areas. But Yays is all about unlocking new neighborhoods for frequent travelers, be they business or leisure, who were keen to travel together with colleagues, with their partners, with their families, with groups of friends. And that essentially was the USP. And people would say, yeah, but that sounds like Airbnb. I said, well, there are elements of it that could be Airbnb. There are elements of it which could be a big hotel room or a hotel suite. There are elements of it which could be in an independent service department or you're sleeping at your friend's place. Sure. But I think what Ye's brought is really high quality design, high quality standardization, uh, plus that generous give back of space to the guests with their business model, which said, hey, we don't need common areas. We don't need a big front of house. We don't need extensive lobbies. We don't have restaurants and bars. We provide you back that space in your individual units so you can invite somebody over. You can cook at home if you're a business traveler that's here for a week on a consulting assignment or a project basis. There's only so many nights you want to eat out at restaurants or takeaway. You can have a fresh breakfast in your own little kitchen in the morning, or you want to do your laundry, or you want to have a colleague over, etc., etc. So we were catering. Yays is catering to an audience that is very much existent, but doesn't have too much options when you're booking in cities like Amsterdam, Paris, and London. It's either Airbnb or a couple of hotel rooms together, and it's a question of affordability,
Yeah.
practicality, and what exactly travelers are looking for in terms of experience.
Looking at the current market at the moment, we can see that serviced apartments are definitely outperforming traditional hotels. Let's make the comparison now between Yays and Citizen M, as you have experience with both. Both are built on a business model, let's say, with little labor costs. So that's of course in the COVID-19 times quite good. So less overhead costs. But on the one side, you have the serviced apartments where it's like, okay, we have a comfort zone. You have your kitchen indoors in your room. Um, However, Citizen M is having more the small room and everybody's in the common areas. How do you think both trends will, or both concept will evolve in the next year or two? Will it all go direction serviced apartments, or do you think once we have a vaccine, people will go back to the way they were traveling before in concepts like Citizen M? And there's, as you mentioned also before, a lot of other concepts in a similar style.
Yeah, that's a fully loaded, or let's say an extensive question, which I think I don't have a magic ball in front of me to predict. I wish I did, and I think we would all be making bets on that now. But I think,
You would be on center stage at IHF.
yeah, on the virtual IHIF, indeed. I think look, it's quite interesting. I'm going to allude a little bit to some of the points I tried to mention before. I hope I'm not confusing in my long answers. But question is, we're talking about, and you and I are in this space called hospitality, or experience. Let's say hospitality, and it's driven around experiences and driven around where those experiences are delivered, and those experiences are generally delivered in a physical space. 2020 has shown that actually they can also be delivered otherwise, but in general, let's say we're talking about physical spaces, tangible spaces, uh, and you have different experiences for different types of occasions and for different types of audiences, right? It's experience, occasion, audience, and then your geographic location is subject to, okay, where does that audience want to be and where does that occasion need to be? if I can, if you can
Yeah.
visualize that. So any of the brands that are privileged enough to be a part of this large experience economy and hospitality business, let's say, have a big question to answer in terms of where is really their value, right? And I don't mean to throw around keywords like value, because that's also quite a heavy word, but where really is their value? Where, like you said, what is their USP? Why do travelers, let's say, when restrictions are lifted and traveling is eased and somewhat normalized in the coming months, whenever that will be, where do you want to go first, right? You as Florian, where are you going to book? Are you going to book, if you had all the choice and you have some money saved up, at a luxurious resort in the Maldives, or are you going to look for a city hotel? What is going to be your first trip after all this is over? And if you can answer that question, it's a question that then hotel developers and investors need to be able to reflect on and answer themselves, right? Because it's not easy. If
Yeah.
you tell me, well, when things are normal and you can go to Zanzibar and then hop on over to Kenya for a safari, you're probably going to have a very specific occasion, right? And that occasion is primarily leisure. It's quite exotic, and potentially will require a decent spending power and a decent amount of time. Or you say, I'm going to go to Zanzibar, book out an Airbnb place, work from Zanzibar for a month because now I can. So your occasion changes completely. Your
Yeah.
audience is still you as Flow, but your purpose of travel is breath of fresh air, take advantage of cheaper accommodation, take advantage of the new working conditions. So it's actually shifting. I think 2020 has done a phenomenal job for our business, for our industry. It has ruined many people's careers, or let's say put a lot of things at standstill. It's turned many businesses upside down and shook up business models. But I think it's a fantastic opportunity, as you and I being relatively young in the business, to really recognize that, hey, we were always taught at EHL and when we graduated that we are part of one of the oldest industries in the world and one of the most slow to adapt and transform, right? And it's still the case, even with innovative business models. Like I said, Citizen M is now 12 years since the first hotel opened, and now they have 20 hotels operating across Europe and North America. That business model is still considered new. If you were to look at
Yeah.
tech, right? If you told me about something 12 years ago, an app or fintech or whatever, it's not going to be relevant today almost, right? So you're almost
Yeah.
starting to see the decline of Facebook, if I can make a big statement like that, amongst our generation. The user interaction and the amount of time we spend on Facebook has reduced significantly if you compare it to 5 years ago or 9 years ago. But with hotels and
Definitely.
hospitality products, that hasn't really changed. And you're more of an expert in terms of innovation, because you see so much new, just the word new, coming out of the tech companies and platforms, etc. And you see that in your business with Hotel Hero, and I think you have a very, very valuable perspective that I personally don't have. And I think from my perspective, it's more from the traditional standpoint, because hospitality is very traditional, but real estate is also extremely traditional. If I can say this, it is one of those businesses that is still run by predominantly Caucasian men in their 50s and 60s with deep wallets, representing investment companies with deeper wallets, and deciding who will operate what in what space. I'm
Yeah.
talking I'm talking from the European context where I was working for the past 5 years. So that is evolving as well. You see far more women in real estate now. You see far more younger, let's say ethnically diverse backgrounds of persons involved in creating new brands. You see far more innovative concepts, but still within the same question that we're answering, which is, what are you going to do? What is the occasion? Who is the audience? And what is the experience you're going to provide them? And then, and I think Citizen M or Yays or all the other brands out there, and future brands are trying to better define that for themselves. But you've also got a commitment, right? As an existing company, you've got a commitment to your shareholders, you've got certain obligations, you've got a commitment to your employees. So how much can you really change? Are these companies geared to change drastically? Oftentimes, no. Simply because if you and I had a business where we had thousands of employees on our payroll and millions of euros worth of assets, and shareholders waiting for their payouts, yeah, you cannot say, oh, because of COVID, we're going to now do this, and this. No, but I
Yeah.
think COVID really triggered the first wave, if I can use that term in a different way, the first wave of a new thought process. And I am yet to see the real thought leadership come out of that, where they say, hey guys, we've got all these right ingredients. We've got aspirational talent. We've got a little bit of technology. We could use a lot more. We've got phenomenal locations. We've got great spaces, great ideas, and we're experts in delivering experiences, the finest cuisine, the best
Yeah.
cocktails. That all exists. But it's the
Yeah.
combination of all of that and how that will be used and valued going forward. And again, the keyword is value on the based on the audience and based on the demand. Because you and I could
Yeah.
very well be having this conversation. I could be in Mauritius and you could be in Zanzibar, and we would not have any difference in the content of our discussion.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
we're in Sri Lanka and Brussels at the moment, so that's already quite international, I would say.
exactly my point. So then it's a question of, okay, what does the revival of business travel look like? And that's one I have strongly differing opinions to, let's say, my former directors, my former senior managers, shareholders, etc., who are of a generation or two older than me, senior to me, or whatever term you want to use. And they see things from a different perspective because obviously they have more extensive experience, and different interests potentially as well. I'm of a different school of thought where I think, there were something like 58 or 52 flights daily between Amsterdam and London. I hope it never goes back to that amount because that's not necessary. Nor
Yeah.
is it for individuals, people themselves, but nor is it good for the planet and the well-being and the environment. So if it's not good for you or the planet, you know, what is your real value as that travel product? Do you want to encourage short quick stays which have very low impact on the community but very high impact on the environment, or do you want to focus on longer higher quality stays that have a bigger impact on the local community and generally a less impact on the environment? So all of these brands are having to face different challenges. Some of them are as simple as, okay, are we going to stay open next year? Are we going to be able to reopen in a couple months? Are we going to sell off? Are we going to be able to reemploy, rehire people, or have to fire more people? Or those are some of the more fundamental questions being answered. But I think from a more thought leadership perspective, it is about the use of space in cities, because then you go back to what I alluded to earlier, which is about different asset classes that hotels are competing with from a development perspective. What about all those office skyscrapers that are essentially empty in Canary Wharf and La Défense? Are people really waiting to commute back into those? And sure, it won't be 100% occupancy, but what can be done with those buildings where they're on paper worth millions, and millions were invested in them? Same with
So
residential.
so what so what would you say now for hospitality assets? Is it a good time looking to the future? As you say, there's a lot of office spaces and commercial spaces which will not be used again as such, and you can put new hospitality concepts in. Or do you think it's quite bad for many city center hotels in, let's say, London or Paris, because you will have much less business travel, at least in the next couple of years, and these assets or these operators will not survive?
I wouldn't want to comment on who will survive and who will not
No,
survive.
not
But
specifically, but on the
yeah,
on the asset class hotels in city centers. Do you think, is it a good is the future looking brighter, or do you think it's more the traditional hotel will maybe not survive so much, but it's more new future proof hospitality concepts which will evolve through this?
I think it's indeed the term future proof is a nice one. I think the key is flexibility. So whoever is most flexible to literally the term uncertain has been used excessively, but I think it's the most appropriate term, right? For the uncertain times that are ahead of us and that have been in the past months. Even if there is a vaccine, what is the spread? What will consumer confidence be like? How will intercontinental travel be? There's clearly been a difference in regulation and management of the health crisis and subsequent travel restrictions in different countries, even neighboring countries, right, between Belgium and the Netherlands, sometimes completely different. And so looking it down on a micro level in terms of hospitality, if you're going to be able to be flexible, then that will allow you to be more resilient. And which companies are more likely to be flexible than others? Yeah, that I think requires a fundamental shift in the way most traditional hotel chains look at their employee structures, look at their business models, look at who they're selling to. It's not going to happen next year or in the next 2 years. It's a gradual shift, I think, that will take place,
Yeah.
and companies will come out more strong and more valuable to their end user. And I think they will serve hospitality products should serve as a center for the communities, right? For the communities in which they exist, not just for guests that are flying in and out, or driving in and out, or taking the train in and out. It's more holistic. I mean, how often do we eat out when we're a resident of a certain city? Quite often, right? In these more cosmopolitan cities like Brussels, Berlin, Amsterdam, Colombo, New York, we eat out a lot. That's a part of our busy lifestyles. How often do we eat out at hotels? Maybe that could be increased. Maybe hotels could be of more value. We have independent gym memberships. Do we need to have independent gym memberships, or could hospitality providers play a bigger role in that? And there are certainly players that have caught onto that trend even before COVID.
Yeah.
What
So it's
does a
all
hotel
about the
concierge mean?
sharing economy.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. You can look at it as being called a sharing economy, or coin a different term for it. I think somebody who I admire in terms of thought leadership is Sebastian Bazin of Accor, and he's definitely got young guys around, and several in different initiatives. I don't follow them all closely, but he's definitely spoken up about hospitality being a sleepy asset class for years. And this is, again, all of this change is happening pre-COVID, but I think COVID has accelerated, just as it has accelerated the use of technology for working remotely, or hosting a podcast like this remotely. It will accelerate the change that the hotel industry has much needed and much been talking about for the past decades.
Oh, definitely. And we can see that the at least on a from a tech perspective, the hotel chains which were already thinking about these concepts before the crisis and were already very like digitally driven or multi-use are definitely performing outperforming the general market due throughout this situation because they're just more flexible and agile, as you mentioned. So that's what for you to close up the your perspective on, let's say, hotel development. You would say the key ingredients for a hospitality business and development is to stay flexible and agile for the future and become a city hub as a hotel and bring your neighborhood into your hotel.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about urban hotels and city hotels, which have been some of the most heavily impacted in recent months, I think so. Especially if you look at cities like London and Amsterdam and so on, where occupancies have really dropped. I think you need to be flexible, agile, and find where your new value add can be, and it's not going to come from your guests on your loyalty program or your frequent travelers. Value add is going to come from your neighbors. Now it needs to come from your neighbors. You need to continue generating sources of smart revenue streams that can then have flexible costs associated with them. So a lot of operators, I mean, companies I've worked for, but many others are talking about variable leases. Variable leases are not new. They've existed for a long time. They might become the new normal, the new standard now, instead of fixed leases. So it's a shift in mentality from various stakeholders in the business, and then it's those combinations of things I mentioned: audience, purpose, or occasion, and what that will be. I still think city hotels is one, but then what about all the people looking at second homes, looking to move away from cities? I don't know where that will be, and I'm very curious to see, as you asked, business travel. Where will that what will that look like? Where will that end up when markets peak up again at the rise of the next cycle? That's one I'm very, very eager to see where that will be, because I think that will shape a lot of the industry. Our industry is built right on business or leisure travel, but that term bleisure that's been talked about more and more towards the end of our studies at EHL is really the reality now. It's bleisure has become our norm because we're working from home, or we're working from wherever, and you have a very fine line between your space. You're sitting and eating dinner at the same place where you had your conference call in the morning. Yeah, that's probably for me the most obvious example of bleisure in a space, right?
it's true. Pleasure actually really became predominant in our lives, as before it was always that kind of little concept which was coming up. That's interesting.
Yeah,
But
it's going to be
let's
interesting to
let
see
let's
what happens. Yeah.
let's move on and look a bit more on your personal story, because I mean COVID-19, as we discussed, had or is having major impacts on the industry and hospitality concepts which are being disrupted, but it also had quite a significant impact on your life, moving from Amsterdam back to your home country Sri Lanka, where you're currently actually in quarantine. We didn't mention it at the beginning so much, but can you tell us maybe where you are at the moment and why you're in quarantine in Sri Lanka?
Yes, indeed. So I am sitting in a hotel room um, at one of Sri Lanka's oldest five-star hotels. Actually, I recently found out, and it apparently was designed by our most famous architect called Jeffrey Bawa. When I say our, the most famous Sri Lankan architect, Jeffrey Bawa, in tropical modernist style. It was not my choice to be sitting in this hotel, and to be honest, I don't appreciate the architecture anymore because this is my eighth day in the same room without the ability to go outside. So I have to do another 6 days or 5 days of mandatory quarantine, as is a requirement by the Sri Lankan government for any travelers coming to the country from outside, including COVID tests, and then 2 weeks at home after that. So it's quite extreme. Well, and thank you, Flo, again for inviting me, because this kind of a podcast occasion helps the time flow in a nice way, and keeps my mind sharp
It's a good
while
distraction.
it's a good distraction, keeps me sharp while I have been in this confined space, but also has been a nice opportunity for me to reflect and think about my next steps, which, as you know, a little bit about, I've come back home to Sri Lanka, where I've always wanted to set up shop and set up my life after gaining valuable education experience and building some fantastic friendships, lifelong friendships in Europe. So it's always my intention to come home, and this year really provided me the opportunity to take the time, space I needed to, while working from home, while working remotely, let's say, to really figure out, okay, where do I see myself for the next 5, 10 years? What do I want to be doing, and in the longer run? And after the first lockdown and so on, I really had good discussions with various mentors, family members, non-family members, entrepreneurs about setting up a business in Sri Lanka together with, of course, my family support structure, and this the current context of COVID really made it. You alluded to Instagram and observing people's lifestyles. I think this year was the easiest year to make a drastic lifestyle adjustment. Moving from the comforts of living in Amsterdam, which I think is one of the most convenient cities in the world. I've lived in about 7 or 8 cities, and Amsterdam really provides you a high quality of life. But at the end of the day, I always knew it was not where I wanted to call my permanent home. So I made the decision and took the risk to leave a comfortable and challenging and rewarding job and life in Amsterdam, to move back to Sri Lanka, to join my family. And I have some exciting new projects in the pipeline, again, together fully with the support of my family structure. And I will leave that as a cliffhanger. Some keywords that maybe I can throw out there is we'll be focusing a lot on community-based experiences, high quality experiences. It will have a hospitality and travel link, but not in the initial stages. The initial stages will be more focused on a more grassroots production. I won't go into too much detail because
We'll
nothing is
keep that for
public.
the next podcast.
Exactly. So let's keep it for the next podcast. But I am indeed fully based in Sri Lanka now, and hospitality will very much be a part of my long-term projects. But in the immediate term, I will be having a more slow-paced life, no more business travel for a while, and really enjoying the tropical island and all the fruits that it has to bear.
So yeah, I mean, could you also share us your thought process behind um, moving back home? I know it's about family business, it's about coming back to your roots, but also, for many, I think, students who came similar to you to Switzerland, to Europe for hotel school, did a couple years in their career there, and are thinking about, maybe going back to their home country. What was the key drive behind it, and what was, at the end of the day, the real driver for you coming home?
So I never thought I'd say this myself, and I curious to hear what you think on this. But you know when people tell you to follow your heart, so as
Yeah, I
cheap,
mean, it
I
can go
think
well and it can
I
go
felt
wrong.
right? Exactly. So it as cheesy as that is, and a lot of mentors who I never imagined them using that phrase were telling me, you need to follow your passion and your heart. And I said, I don't know where my heart is. Like it's like somewhere in my body, but like what? So yeah, I think I think it is a gut. It was a gut feeling, actually, a gut instinct. It doesn't sound like a very well founded decision, but I can, and you can see that with my background. Hang on a sec, I have to get my temperature checked. One sec. Sorry, guys. Back.
They
So
were,
I think,
they were
can you guys hear me?
checking for you. They were checking if you're in bed already.
Yeah, indeed. They were trying to see if I have some kind of other disease. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, yes, they do two temperature checks every day, one in the morning and one in the evening. It's the military medical team, so they knock on the door until you open it. So sorry about that, but essentially, yeah, following my heart. No, I think as we discussed a couple months ago, Florian, when I gave you a heads up that I'd be moving out, but it was still relatively confidential. Uh, there's an element of risk that I wanted to take in stepping and making this step as well, and I think it's about timing. It's really about timing when you look at 2020 being a year that has changed a lot for many people in terms of simply how you live your day to day because of COVID and the restrictions and all kinds of changes. So that gave me the confidence in saying, if I'm going to make a big life decision like this, such as relocating to my home country, leaving again, as I said, a comfortable job and life in Europe, to venture somewhat on my own in Sri Lanka, leaving behind my closest friends as well in that region. I think the lifestyle changes are quite minimal at the moment because in a sense everybody around the world is in some form of quarantine or not for the next coming months, and I think that will not last for too much longer than next year, let's say. So the initial adjustment has been minimal. um, Having said that, I've only been here 8 days in this hotel room, but I think this year has really provided me with the confidence and support I needed in thinking markets are shifting. Economies in various ways are shifting. In Sri Lanka's example, the economy is really suffering. Right, tourism it was until COVID the third largest foreign revenue generator for the country. Our export earnings are significantly down. Business is down. The island is technically shut to anybody except citizens willing to repatriate or wishing to repatriate. And you can say the same of many global economies, many countries. There are fundamental changes happening, of which we will only see the lasting impacts in years to come. And that is in essence why I said, what, me moving home is really a drop in the bucket when you look at things from a big picture. So I think this is going to be a really nice time to foster new relationships, to build a brand and build a business together with my local network, and to take risks and definitely live a different life where I will not be jumping on a train or a plane to change cities every week as I was doing in the past years.
Yeah, no, definitely. Out of every crisis, there's always some opportunity arising, and I think it's as you said, maybe the best moment to make such a big shift, but also definitely one of the riskiest or yeah, big decisions you can take. As many would say, okay, I'm staying in my safe job where I have a safe future, but going for the change now, I think that's very cool, and I'm very excited to hear and be updated about experiences over the next couple of months and years. And next time, I hope to have you on the podcast where you can really tell us about what you've launched in Sri Lanka and the great success it is. So, Chalana, thank you very much for a very inspiring and also informative session. I learned a lot about hotel development, and I'm sure that a lot of our listeners got great insights into hospitality concepts and what's future proof.
Thank you very much, Flor, for having me. It was a pleasure, and I look forward to welcoming you in Sri Lanka when the borders are open. Thanks.
Well, definitely, I take you by your word, and then we can do an in-person episode with Arne coming with me, and then we're flying to Sri Lanka.
Excellent. We'll have some elephants in the background and all that fun stuff.
That's it for this episode, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Special thanks to our season sponsor, I Reckon You, hospitality's first customer data platform. Their philosophy is to stop buying software and building a framework. Their middleware platform connects a hotel's above property and on-premise systems, creating a frictionless flow of hotel and guest data that enhances the guest journey while increasing operational efficiency. Find out more at ireckonyou.com, and don't forget to check out what there is to know about Smack at smack.media or on our YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, or Facebook channel. We'll see you next time.